Welcome to the Clause series of podcasts. This one is a very special one because it is mainly our what we call the Clause Junior League. So we have our young scholars who will be speaking on a subject so that we have a different perspective from the ones we hear constantly. So I would like these scholars to bring out how they approach a project, how do they look at it, and so that there is more critical thinking that we can evolve. And we would encourage anybody in the audience who would like to be part of this. You can always write to us and we'll put you on board. So let's quickly get into the subject. The subject we're going to discuss is very interesting. While everybody talks about the huge Chinese projects, you've got Hambantota, you've got Gwadar, you've got all sorts of these large projects in all our neighboring countries. There is little or no attention. I haven't seen anything on this before. On where are the Chinese actually? How many Chinese are there on the ground? What are they doing? Is it just? It's not all just about projects. There's a bunch, as you can see as we go through. There's a whole number of Chinese involved in a number of businesses, sometimes in the most surprising places and doing the most surprising things. So this is about what is under the radar. That is what we're looking at. Let me introduce our speakers: Anjali Manhas, who looks at Bangladesh; Akashika, who looks at Pakistan; Yuvvraj, who is unfairly rather out of his area, which is the US, but will be looking at Maldives and Sri Lanka; and Ashu, who is a Chinese expert, who will be dealing with Nepal as well, and who will look at this whole thing in as to what does this mean in terms of our security? How do the Chinese work this? Because we know that China is a hugely controlling state. So it's not by accident that there are these bunch of Chinese in some very places very close to our border, right? So that kind of thing is something I think we really need to be concerned about. So we'll start off with Pakistan, where there are plenty of Chinese to work with. So let's see what Akashika has to say.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Once again, it's very lovely to be on another podcast and another episode of the Youth and Young Scholars podcast. With regard to Pakistan and China, you're absolutely right. I think there's no dearth of information when it comes to the cooperation and coordination between China and Pakistan. But in particular, the one we're talking about today is extremely interesting because we are talking about small businesses and businesses that do not make the spotlight as much in news forums as they would usually do. So what we're trying to look here, and for me to contextualize very briefly about what we're talking about in terms of Pakistan, is data as per the Pakistan-China Joint Chamber of Commerce and Industry. And for that, I think for all of our visual learner audiences, this is the premise of how we are looking at Pakistan and China relations in terms of small businesses. This is data, like I said, by the Pakistan-China Joint Chamber of Commerce and Industry, wherein the Chinese companies registered on the official forum in a city-wise breakdown in Pakistan. In all of these cities, which includes all of the 4 provinces, as well as a couple of regions in Pakistan-occupied Kashmir. So we see how staggering the numbers are. In, of course, larger cities like Islamabad and Lahore, there are thousands of ones which are registered on the official platform. But even if you do look at the smaller ones, all of these different small businesses and micro businesses, they are indulged in various different forms of things that we do. So if we look at the geography of things and what kind of industry all of these small businesses are in, you can have lodging, you can have tourism, you can have food industry. A lot of them are involved in mining and quarrying activities as well, which is distributed throughout the geography of the country, as well as, like you had very rightly pointed out, closer to our borders and closer to other borders also that we should be concerned about. So the map on your screen currently is the one that looks at Gilgit. So if you see, there are, like I was saying, there are multiple different angles and various spaces that all of these Chinese personnel and Chinese companies, small companies that are registered in. So a large section of them are involved in mining, steel industry, as well as tourism and lodging, especially in areas that are anyway a little bit volatile in terms of like internal Pakistan fallacies, as well as a lot of like criminal and violent activities that we're going to go ahead ahead and discuss later in the podcast. Something very similar, if you see in Peshawar and Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, of course, being a very volatile region in itself. Despite all of these things, we see that there is heavy personnel and heavy Chinese nationals involvement in all of these countries, in all of these regions. If I'm not wrong, it was the vice president of the same Pakistan China joint chamber who said in 2024 that there are about 2,300 small businesses registered in Pakistan. This data is, of course, we don't have access to as much data about Pakistan as we would like, but this is about 7 months ago. So we know that these are the large figures that come in with regard to Pakistan. And now the question, of course, which we are discussing and would want to get answers to through this podcast is what actually happens here. But just for contextualizing and just as opening remarks, I think this sets the premise and the baseline of what we are discussing today in terms of Pakistan.
Absolutely. And if you notice in that map, you're talking of steel industry in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. I mean, how weird is that?
Ma'am.
I haven't heard of any steel industry there. Number two is that the mining in Gilgit, right?
Right.
There is no news stories of official sanction of Chinese mining. But about 2 years ago, there was a report of a scuffle. There, I think the local people got beaten up. There were these, policemen who came because they were protesting against granting of licenses to Chinese in that area. So this kind of brings it up. And I think it's important to remember in all the data that we're looking at, these are the registered ones. Which are the unregistered ones are probably twice this number. So with that, we'll go to the close cousin, Bangladesh. Please start. Anjali, all yours.
Well, thank you so much, ma'am, first of all, for having me on this podcast. And in 2025, Chinese engagement with Bangladesh has gone far beyond traditional diplomacy. It's now very deeply rooted in soft power, with a focus on long-term influence across society. One of the clearest example of this is Beijing's outreach to non-state political actors like the Jamaat-e-Islami, which is a very controversial yet very influential player in Bangladesh's political landscape. While most Western nations and even India, they avoid such engagements due to ideological or human right concern, China's approach is very pragmatic. It wants to build relationship across the political spectrum, ensuring that it influence endures regardless of who's in power in Dhaka. Um, in July 2025, a nine-member Jamaat delegation, which was led by the party chief, also made their second visit to China. So this time, directly at the invitation of the Chinese Communist Party. Back in September 2024, also, the Chinese ambassador even called the Jamaat a disciplined and a very well organized party, which is a huge nod of legitimacy. China seems to be taking a pragmatic approach, engaging with Jamaat not necessarily for ideological alignments, but for also strategic access and influence. In April 2025, also, China showcased 2600 drone light show in Dhaka just to celebrate their 50 years of diplomatic relations between China and Bangladesh. So this drone show was a part of their broader year of people-to-people exchange between the two countries, showcasing that China isn't just influencing the political or economic realm, but is also deeply cultural. It's reaching the everyday people of Bangladesh and strengthening bonds beyond the government halls. China also recently launched a digital Silk Route project, which supports infrastructure for digital connectivity. It includes expanding access of 4G to 5G networks, internet infrastructure, and e-governance initiative across Bangladesh and Myanmar both. And as of 2025, over 200 million people in these countries now use Chinese-backed digital service. In September 2025, also, China hosted the second China Bangladesh exhibition in Dhaka, uh, drawing hundreds of business leaders, cultural groups, and investors. So, events like these, they are designed not to just promote trade, but also to deepen public perception of China as a very trustworthy partner in Bangladesh's development journey. And to this, China's growing support for language programs, cultural exchange, and student scholarship, and even media collaboration clearly shows that Beijing is embedding itself within the civil and cultural fabric of Bangladesh, and not just the corridors of power. So I think this form of soft power investment is it's strategic and it's very enduring. It is helping Bangladesh to shape futures of the elite in business, media, and bureaucracy. So I'll just say that China is not just building bridges or railways. It is building influence that actually lasts, regardless of the political change. And for India and West, this is very critical inflection point, because if they continue to rely only on government to government ties, while China is cultivating influence at every level of society. So I think there is failing behind is that the long game of regional diplomacy.
The last figure which I have is that about 98,000 Chinese in Bangladesh. What are these people doing? So if you look on Google at, say, just put broad search, Chinese businesses, Chinese spas, Chinese restaurants, the list is huge. They are all over the place, and you'll find most of the time they are clustered around the project. So because if there are Chinese staying there, they want tourism, they are in tourism, etc. And also the fact that they have access with these Confucius institutes into at least, if I'm not mistaken, 4 universities in Bangladesh. That's a lot. So Chinese language has become the preferred choice for Bangladeshis because it gives them jobs. And they give them jobs because the projects are there. So it's a kind of interlinked. And because the projects are there, there's a bunch of other smaller businesses which are supporting the Chinese in that area. So that is, I think, something we need to dig a little more into. Let's look at Sri Lanka and Maldives quickly. Yeah. Yuvvraj, all yours.
Thank you, ma'am, and good evening to all our viewers. And I think starting with Sri Lanka being the larger neighbor of the two, and I think because the involvement of Chinese nationals have been in Sri Lanka for much longer than it has been in Maldives. So covering the basic details first, I think according to a couple of reports, there are approximately 5,000 Chinese nationals currently in Sri Lanka working on various things, various sectors. And if you look at the registered businesses in Sri Lanka, so one official report of the Board of Investment of Sri Lanka says that it's approximately at 35 registered Chinese companies operating in Sri Lanka with 10 awaiting registration. So that is the official number. However, if you look at reports from Sri Lankan think tanks and other academia research journals, you will see that the number is somewhere around 90 to 100. So these are the 90 to 100 registered companies that are operating, Chinese companies operating in Sri Lanka. So we can make an estimate that if you actually look at the unregistered and if you start looking deeper into the if you started looking deeper into the list of companies that are operating under a disguise, you would see that you find that the number is actually much larger. So starting from the basics, when it comes to Chinese presence in Sri Lanka, so the major presence is obviously in Colombo with the ports and the embassy, the Chinese cultural centers. That I think it's a common knowledge how major presence China has in Colombo. Then moving on to Hambantota Port, again one of the major investments of the Chinese, including the industrial zone, which is not mentioned as much because people usually focus on the port itself. However, there's a major industrial zone being created right around the port, which is obviously an SEZ, which, if you see, not only includes parts of economics, but also there are strategic dual-use assets that are reported there. So again, unverified reports, unconfirmed reports. But if you look at OSINT data and if you look at satellite imagery, you will find that there are a lot of dual-use infrastructure being built on Hambantota Port and the industrial zone around it. Thirdly, the M. Rajapaksha Port, again, major Chinese construction there. And then fourth is one of the major strategies being used by China is tourism hubs. So in both the countries, in both Sri Lanka and Maldives, tourism is being used as a major tool. So tourist hubs, especially in Bentota and Galle, have come up with. If you look at a deep dive, you'll see that major tourist presence, major resort staffs are Chinese nationals. They are using Chinese nationals as resort staff. They're using them for local businesses. They're using them for payment gateways also. They're using Chinese payment gateways in all these tourist places. And apart from tourism, I think the number 2 in Sri Lanka would be university towns. So university towns, including Colombo, universities in Colombo as well as Kandy, which are major, again, coming under the purview of you had mentioned Confucian Institutes. So I think there are 3 to 4 Confucian Institutes working both in Colombo and Kandy, where student exchanges, cultural exchanges are the norm. Then these were the broader open source stuff that I think that are public knowledge, they're common knowledge. But I think what we are here for today is doing a deep dive into the smaller businesses and the medium-sized businesses. So if you look at that, I think I have put I'll just put this slide on. Yeah. So this is the approximate number of the sector-wise division of how many Chinese small and medium enterprises are operating in Sri Lanka. So if you have a look, obviously the major part is in the restaurants, the F&Bs, the hospitality sector, coming all the way down to logistics, groceries, health, private construction, etc. So this is just for just for reference. Again, a lot of these are unverified, but this is all the data that is available in open source. Secondly, after tourism and education, I think thirdly, the major investment includes construction companies in Sri Lanka, includes companies like China Harbour Engineering, Sino Hydro Corporation, China Merchant Port Holdings. All these are major powers that are involved in the construction for the past, I think, 2 decades within ports and industrial zones of Sri Lanka. So that was Sri Lanka. If we come to Maldives, Maldives is again similar presence. Around 3,500 Chinese nationals reported to being operating in Maldives. And I think if you trace the Chinese strategy in Maldives, you'll find that there's a clear shift away from transactional infrastructure-based relations to a more deeper, multifaceted presence. It has moved on from just economics and trade to a larger strategic angle. And the strategic goals of Sri Lanka would range from securing sea lanes of communication to maritime access over a very important choke point, which is obviously the Indian Ocean region. And again, similar strategy being employed in Maldives, which includes dual use infrastructure, including the international airport of Vellana, which is the second most important airport after Malé. So again, if you look at open source data, it says that there is dual use infrastructure that is used for civilian as well as for strategic purposes. Recently, there was a defense pact signed between both the countries. It's a defense cooperation agreement between China and Maldives, which is on the lines of not just sale of small arms, but also a security arrangement which says that in terms of providing of naval assets, providing of base, port of calls, it includes all those details. If you look at the defense cooperation agreement recently signed. So, and when it comes to Maldives, I think number one sector obviously has to be tourism, which is the largest channel when it comes to people-to-people ties between China and Maldives. And the highest number of tourists, especially if it used to be India, but after India's boycott towards Maldives in late 2023 and 24, you could see that the number was replaced by China, equal if not more in number. So there are language schools, there are cultural schools being opened in Maldives, all to cater to the Chinese tourists coming, especially at the time of the Chinese New Year, which is January and February. So most of the Maldivian nationals who are involved in through the year catering to other countries, any other countries, are now focusing on Chinese tourists as a written strategy. So there's Chinese speaking staff in resorts, there are menus, there are everything that are printed in Mandarin, and yes, so that is the strategy being used. And number two here as well is the Chinese contractors and migrant workers who are working in Maldives, part of the larger push by China to build infrastructure in Maldives. Again, dual-use infrastructure. Again, a lot of it not in open source, not been registered with the Maldives government. So if you look at the numbers and if you see reports, there are reports of Chinese migrants being facing harassment by Maldivian authorities. So that just shows that the amount of migrants increasing from islands which were not initially habited by the Chinese. So initially they were focused on the major urbanized islands of Maldives. However, if you look at the data now, it's showing that islands that were uninhabited and untouched by Chinese presence are also being included in the larger frame of things that is the Chinese strategy in Maldives. And that's it.
I think that's a very good wrap up for a first round. Ashu, you want to quickly cover Sri Lanka? Nepal?
Yeah. Ma'am, so first, before I speak about China's influence or investments in Nepal, we have to understand the means China uses. So there are 3 means that China uses when it enters into any country or when it engages with any country. The first one is economic, economy. Second one is propaganda, and third one is coercion or rewards. I mean, that means a carrot and stick policy. Economic means can mean anything from joint ventures to infrastructure projects or tourism. Tourism is also a main factor. When it goes to propaganda, it runs through three basic structures. So the first one will be state-run cultural centers, your Confucius institutes. The second one is then education system, and the third one is media. The third arm is coercion or rewards. Coercion would mean that whenever any media, whenever any politician or anyone speaks against Chinese or writes against Chinese, there will be official condemnation of that from either from the embassy, or they will be coerced through other means, or they will be rewarded through advertisements like in the media or through projects in the business center. Now, when we talk about China's economic engagement with Nepal, officially there are more than 1,000 joint ventures with the Nepalese companies, and around 100 registered Chinese run companies in Nepal, and they are from everywhere from cement manufacturing to airports to building dams or to building highways and roads, etc. They are everywhere. When we see their cultural centers, so China has two Confucius institutes in Nepal. The first one is in Kathmandu University, and the second one is in Tribhuvan University. When we see the propaganda, how they do it is that, recently in December 2024, they started training 40 Nepalese journalists in the Confucius Institute in Kathmandu, and media education was only a part of it. The most of it was focused on on teaching them Chinese about Chinese culture and teaching them Mandarin, and also teaching them. I don't know if. What they meant by it, but ethics of journalism, and when it comes to China, we can be, like ethics is a big thing. Now, when we come to tourism, the tourism is a main factor in China's economic engagement with other countries, and Nepal is certainly there. Pre-COVID, Nepal accounted for 15% total of Chinese tourists in Nepal, much below India. Then it fell to 6% in 2022, and by 24 it rose again to 9%. It's still below India, but it's increasing. And with that, Chinese hotels and investments also come. Now there are 400 Chinese hotels which are operating in Nepal, which are completely manned by Chinese labor. And not just that, they fall outside the purview of any payment system that Nepal uses. Every bookings and payments are done through Alipay or this WeChat, and they don't follow any Nepalese this payment system, and it all goes to Chinese people in China only. Now, when we come to coercion or rewards, so China had one thing that was working for China before this year was that ideologically they had the same government in Nepal, and that also helped China. A lot of news media outlets were not, let's say, were not permitted to write anything against China. One good example is Rashtriya Samadhan Smriti that wrote against China's actions in Tibet and Xinjiang, and the government officially opened an investigation against the newspaper, and even the Chinese embassy also demarched them. So that's all about opening on Nepal.
I mean, we've covered a lot of ground. There is some, actually, I just wanted to add to Yuvvraj also the fact that, when we had that crisis with Maldives, if you look at the next month, the number of Chinese tourists just shot up. It's like I can't believe that somebody would have a planned exercise to put a lot of Chinese on an aircraft and tell them go to Maldives, but it seems that's what seems to have happened. Now, there is a darker side which we have discussed to Chinese presence, which is the rise of Chinese organized crime and criminal networks in all these countries, which is detrimental to our security because they are teaming up with local gangs. Like in Pakistan, they team up with the drug smugglers. That kind of activity, which then works across the entire region. It operates into Myanmar, Bangladesh, but in India, I mean, we've seen these massive, huge, in fact, I think it was last month, we had this huge seizure of meth of Gujarat. Gujarat is seeing a lot of this movement. So let's see in each of these countries what is the criminal under, what it kind of, so perhaps it supports the system. I don't know, but we need to look at this aspect. So Akashika, could you go ahead?
Yes, ma'am, absolutely. The issue here is that with the data that we have all presented, and with the data that particularly about Pakistan that I presented earlier, the first observation that I wanted to highlight, irrespective, was that we can't take that data at face value in the first place. So while you're absolutely right that these are the figures that they want us to see in terms of these are the registered ones. So there might be so many unregistered ones that we don't know of at this point. But another thing to note here is, while we were doing the geographical mapping and plotting of those figures that we showed on the podcast earlier, there were so many addresses from that entire list of things that just didn't exist, or those pinpoints you just couldn't find. So even while there are registered companies in under all of these, like, official databases, we're not really sure how that looks like and what really happens on ground. But that's one of the things that I found really interesting, that even while that is an official source of data and that is what is officially put out, you can't really take it at face value, is what the entire point is. But in terms of more the thing that you're talking about, it being a criminal undertones and criminal connections to these entire like Chinese nationals in Pakistan particularly, the latest case that we see, yet again, all of these people are involved in various areas. It's not specifically human trafficking, it's not specifically a particular thing that they're doing, it's just various areas they're involved in. A couple of case studies, if I may. The most latest one being in July 2025, when the Pakistan's National Cybercrime Investigation Agency, they arrested about 149 people for running a scam fake call center, wherein these 149 implicated people, they would be asking for more money from all of these people, and like huge amounts of money came in, and out of this about 150 people, 48 were Chinese. 6 were Bangladeshis, if I'm not wrong. A couple were from Myanmar. Two were from Myanmar, if I'm not wrong. Which is to say that there is sort of a regional connect in terms of when it comes to you've entered a country, and now there's a regional connect in terms of how that dark underbelly which you're talking about works. So this is the most recent case. If you remember, there's another of March 2024, if I'm not wrong, which is to say that geographically this is also spread. There was a Chinese national who was arrested in Skardu, Gilgit-Baltistan, for illegally having 65 tons of mica in his residence. What he was doing was illegally mining mica without any official or any legal documents. What is interesting here is, just a couple of months later, he was left on bail. We don't really know what happened to him. He was left on bail, and that's about it. That's one headline of, and that's it. This is Gilgit-Baltistan. Let's take it 1 year before as well. 2 Chinese nationals arrested in Pakistan in April 2023 for blasphemy. Of course, that is the arrested national was a worker in a hydropower project in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, and he had made a sort of a snide remark to the workers, telling them to work faster instead of praying, and that became a huge outcry. And then he was never charged, he was never executed, something that the same leniency and mercy is not extended to others in Pakistan under charges of blasphemy. He was never executed, nothing ever happened to the man, so to say, but he was still charged. And lastly, ma'am, in terms of the entire criminal network thing, and probably one of the most interesting pieces of data that I came across while researching for the podcast is reports from 2019 and 2022 suggest that there was a massive outcry about bride trafficking between Pakistan and China along the CPEC. So the same routes that are being used in the name of development and like cooperation and all of that, there was an insane outcry about all of these young Pakistani girls and women who were transported and married off, fraudulently married off to all of these Chinese nationals in the name of having a good life and in the name of more money. But almost all of them reported abuse. Almost all of them reported horrible living conditions when they found their way there. In reaction to all of this, and this is where it gets interesting, is 52 Chinese nationals who were involved in this trafficking were arrested. And this is after there was a massive media outcry. The people started talking about it, that these are the same routes that are being used for bride trafficking and all of that. This is 2019. And early 2019 is when these 52 Chinese nationals were arrested. But notice here that by the end of 2019, the same fate happened to those 52 people. They were either on bail or they were acquitted in a Pakistani court. This is a report from Brookings, if I'm not wrong, which highlights two issues as to why this outcry didn't really materialize into something big, right? Number one, they say that, of course, the social stigma that comes with in Pakistan and in general, a lot of South Asian cultures is about honor. And second, and more importantly here, is the fact that they have always wanted to not highlight this as this negative dark underbelly that we are talking about of the Pakistan-China all-weather friendship and cooperation out in the world. So what they did was, journalists were told to stop talking about it. Investigators were told by Pakistani authorities to, let this be, let it slide. So what we're trying to build here basically is the fact that, particularly with regard to China and Pakistan, of course, there are a lot of these underdealings and a lot of these undercurrents that keep happening. We have less access to all of this in terms of data in the first place. And B, even if we do have access to all of these things, we can't take it at face value. And you just never trust what's happening on ground. Because there's a picture that is being shown to us, but as much as we try to, uncover all of these things that we are talking about, this will always be like one of the darkest, biggest question marks. But of course, that said, it exists, and we know that it's a very, very real network of things that gets connected in this part of the world, for sure.
Yeah, I think that's why we kept looking at, the invisible presence of Chinese. So that's what else are they doing other than these, to talk about the Ion brothers, blah, blah. So there's a lot, this, like you said very correctly, is the dark underbelly. Very quickly, Anjali, your version, just a quick wrap up of the Chinese trafficking there. I know the scam and Ponzi schemes continues in Bangladesh. So pretty much the overall operations are the same.
I'll cover China's criminal influence in Myanmar and Bangladesh both, because it's huge there. Starting with Myanmar first, there is this Kokang area, which is a hotspot of Chinese-linked organized crime. So it's in the northern Myanmar, Shan state. So there is this Ming family syndicate, which is based here, which run a vast criminal empire involving telecom fraud, online scam, drug trafficking, illegal casinos, and prostitution since 2015. So this family wielded armed control, maintained corrupt ties to local armed groups, and in 2025, Chinese courts sentenced several members of the syndicates to death or life imprisonment. Also, there is this Laokeng border area. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it right, but these areas are the basis for scammers or illegal operations, which are often protected by corrupt factions and are exploited during Myanmar civil war also for illicit gains. Then there is Chinese criminal syndicate are also tied to the ethnic armed groups such as the United War State Army and the other military along with the China-Myanmar border. So these groups also facilitate the trafficking of narcotics, especially heroin, further complicating our regional security. And these areas are also hubs where traffickers abduct and exploit victims, including forced labors for online scams targeting China and globally. And in 2025, China has intensified its diplomatic and law enforcement cooperation with Myanmar and Thailand also to crack down such operations, notably after high-profile case like the abduction of a Chinese actor, Wang Xing, if I'm not wrong, in scam compounds near the Myanmar border. Now talking about Bangladesh, obviously there is this Chattogram port that is not just a strategic economic hub, but it is also subject to illicit smuggling operations linked to Chinese criminal organization. Then there are some illicit activities that have been also reported around Chinese infrastructure projects, especially with respect to the BRI, where lack of oversight allows criminal elements to operate. Also, if we talk about the key border areas on China-Bangladesh border that involve smuggling and human trafficking, it's the Mengla Tamabali border checkpoint, which is a China-Bangladesh border checkpoint, which, a, which is a major official crossing point, but also a very hotspot for smuggling goods like fake medicines, electronics, drugs under the cover of trade activities. And also, there is this Ruli and Bandarban border or adjacent areas. It's near the Chittagong Hill Tract only. So this zone actually offers rugged terrain, which is used by the traffickers to bypass official checkpoints, and which is complicating, obviously, the border control efforts. So additionally, a few facts before I close up, that China embassy in Bangladesh has also issued repeated warnings in 2025 against illegal cross border marriage spams specifically, especially targeting vulnerable women from Chittagong Hill Tract and other rural areas. In a 2025 crackdown, Chinese law enforcement also arrested around 1,500 individuals who were involved in human trafficking and marriage scams, which were linked to Bangladesh and Myanmar. So this indicates the scale of the illicit trade is huge. And to conclude, I'll just say that together these issues reveal shadow layer of China's regional influence that combines economic and strategic ambitions with actually covert criminal networks, posing ongoing challenges for both Bangladesh and Myanmar's internal security and regional geopolitical stability for sure.
I think that's a fascinating wrap up, Anjali. I didn't know there was so much involved. My goodness, I mean, I'm glad you took the Myanmar
Let's
Bangladesh axis as well. There's incidentally this area has historically been an area of criminal activities, which is if you go back to the British Gazette of India, you'll find that so it seems some areas are very prone to criminality, but then nonetheless, Yuvraj, your views on this.
So, ma'am, the criminal networks operated by China are very much different in the islands than they are in, say, Pakistan or Bangladesh, because obviously lack of a land border and lack of direct connectivity. So, what initially, if you look at the criminal cases or what were registered as criminal cases initially in Maldives and Sri Lanka were small petty infractions of visa overstays or bar fights or small crime, petty crime. Then it evolved into IUU fishing, which is illegal and underreported fishing. And now it has crossed into, especially talking of Sri Lanka, it has crossed into gold and narcotic smuggling, especially gold and other jewelry, which is currently the most smuggled item that is reported by Sri Lankan authorities. So, if to cite one case study, on the 15th of August 2025, around 30 billion rupees, Sri Lankan rupees, were the gold worth 30 billion rupees from Sri Lanka was captured at the Colombo airport, and it was linked to a Chinese father and daughter duo who used to make constant trips from China to Sri Lanka, and over their 7-year multiple trips to Sri Lanka, they have smuggled over 201 million Sri Lankan rupees, all through gold and through multiple jewels like moonstones, star sapphires, emeralds, all smuggled out of Sri Lanka. So this was flagged at the highest level at Sri Lanka because this was just the first. This was not the first case, but it was just the first highlighted case of Chinese nationals coming at the pretext of tourism and smuggling out precious jewelry out of the country. So then the the Sri Lankan tax agencies also notified this and went into further research. And then they stated that over 38 billion worth of Sri Lankan rupees was lost due to informal and parallel economy that was operated by the Chinese nationals out of Sri Lanka. So they were losing tax revenue, they were losing VAT revenue, they were losing all sorts of revenue that was supposed to be Sri Lankan revenue, but due to the parallel economy being created by the Chinese nationals, that was lost. So currently, profiling the criminal cases of Chinese nationals in Sri Lanka, it is mostly based out of gold and narcotic smuggling. However, coming to Maldives, it's slightly different. Since there is a lack of natural resources in Maldives, if you'll see that the large majority of criminal cases that are being reported are clashes between the migrant Chinese and the local Maldivian authorities. So these are clashes at different levels. These are clashes at the local industry level, and these are clashes also happening at the larger disagreement between how between the rights and between what the between what the contractual situation is between the Maldivian government and the local migrant workers. There was also a reported stabbing of Chinese nationals done by hardline Maldivian nationals termed jihadists by their own newspaper agencies. There was multiple stabbings conducted. I think there were 3 reported, where I think 2 Chinese nationals lost their lives. So this is other way around. This is Maldivians conducting criminal activity on Chinese nationals. And then there are also reported cases of regular sexual assault by Chinese tourists coming into Maldives especially during the peak months of Chinese New Year, when Maldives sees the highest amount of Chinese tourists. There are regular cases of sexual assault being committed by Chinese tourists on Maldivian nationals, various Maldivian nationals, and the latest one being in 2024. So yes, ma'am. So the theme of crime is very different in the islands compared to the mainland, and between islands as well, because of lack of natural resources and the geography.
So, to an extent, Sri Lanka and Maldives have got some protection because they are islands. But then also, the whole drug network, which as other people have looked at thoroughly, Sri Lanka is a transit area, and so is Maldives. Both are transit area for these drug operations, which involve one side the Pakistani cartels, on the other side the Chinese cartels. So that is also something which Sri Lankans I know are extremely worried about. So Ashu, what I'm trying to get at is, is there a larger design in this? Not just, okay, we're not just talking the criminal activities, we're talking of now what we're talking of the businesses, the spread of Chinese in these areas. Is it just accidental, or is it part of China's policy to kind of seed these countries with their own nationals for for influence operations, and also for, let's face it, hardcore intelligence?
Ma'am, when we see there have been various reports from intelligence organizations or think tanks which have been quoted in the media. Chinese government maintains mutually beneficial and strategic relationships with organized crimes which operate in other countries. And this is not about blanket encouragement, but it's a calculated engagement which is aimed at advancing China's geopolitical influence and economic interests. Now, in exchange for this tacit support, criminal networks provide the CCP with intelligence, political influence, and assistance with transnational repression, such as silencing dissidents abroad. And this relationship is particularly evident in regions like Southeast Asia, in Latin America, where China's BRI has created opportunities for illicit activities. Now, when we talk about evidence,
Just one second. Something like what Anjali said, which is a large criminal enterprise operating close to Chinese borders. I can't imagine that the Chinese don't know about it and they're not doing anything about it. So we also need to sort of look possibly in the future as the very large trades which they operate in billions of dollars. What is their connection to the Chinese state? That also is a second layer. But please go on. Yeah.
Yeah. So when we see what are the evidences of this state-linked criminal activities, so there are 3 to 4 factors in that. Number one is corruption and infiltration. In regions with weak governance or smaller countries like Nepal, Bangladesh, or Myanmar, or Sri Lanka, Chinese criminal syndicates have leveraged large-scale investment to cope local elites and undermine law enforcement. Even Carnegie did a thorough study on it in 2022, how Chinese these operate in countries, and where they operate with local elites, economic elites, and they operate in gambling, human trafficking, and lucrative call centers, as everyone has said. Another factor is their trade networks, illicit networks, to be more precise. Now, Chinese criminal networks are involved in illicit trades, including trafficking of drugs, wildlife, and counterfeit goods. Wildlife is the major thing. In 2022, four Chinese nationals were caught in Nepal, in Kathmandu precisely, with 162 kilograms of pangolins, which they had smuggled from Ghana and were taking it to China through land routes. Now, pangolin is used for two things in China. One, it's a delicacy in southern regions, and another, it's for medicine and herbs. Now, when we see like why does this do these things happen? So it has more to do with incentives and complicity. First is geopolitical interest. CCP benefits from, like I said, their intelligence, their influence, and security services provided by these criminal groups. Second one is economic gains. Some illicit activities like exploitation of illegal logging, mining, directly serves China's industrial needs and financial system. Another one, an example is their fishing in international waters, or fishing in waters of other countries. Then another is denial and plausible deniability. By operating through non-state actors, Beijing can deny any criminal activities while benefiting from their outcomes. And the final one is selective enforcement. While China sometimes crackdowns on criminal networks, especially when its own citizens are victimized or its international image is at risk, but it's very selective. These enterprises don't harm China's core interests, and they are allowed to operate without interference as long as they stay away from their core interests and help the state in influence in outside world.
Yeah, I think
That's all.
that's. I think at some point, all of us need to work together on how many of these networks operate into India. For example, if there are drug trafficking which is taking place, it cannot happen without people within the country supporting those networks. So whether this operates in terms of other, criminal activity or not, whether that is something I think which we should flag, and we need to take a lot of work on this. It's not just enough to say XYZ is operating, and they're all. It's a question of are they how are they impacting our security in terms of not just criminal, in terms of, like you said, illicit activities, in terms of spying, in terms of the fact that many of these people, like you said, are very, very close to our borders. I think there is something coming up close to the Teesta River project. There is a huge, just recently they're talking of building a
There's heavy
hospital.
Chinese involvement there.
Yeah, so it's always combined with the projects, and surprise, the projects are close to your border. So I think this is going to be a work in progress, because I don't think we've finished with this yet. And what I need to congratulate you all is, I don't think anybody else has done this kind of work before. So I think this was a very, very, very interesting aspect, which we have, I think, as Clause, we should be proud of that we've done this work. So we will close this year, and thank you all so much. And thank you to our listeners. If you have questions, please put them in the chat box. And good evening to you all.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.